So today we're going to be talking about sculpting inside of Cinema 4D Release 14, and I must admit the sculpting tools inside of Cinema are really good. I've used other sculpting programs before, such as Modo. They have some sculpting capabilities. Of course, ZBrush being the main one. Now, ZBrush is purely a sculpting 3D application. Yet, Cinema 4D does a really good job in giving us the majority of the tools we need in order to sculpt inside Cinema 4D instead of going to ZBrush. Now, if you're going to be a hardcore sculptor and you just focus solely on sculpting, then of course you will purchase a sculpting application like ZBrush. Now for us, for me, really as a 3D generalist, having that sculpting capabilities inside of Cinema 4D just saves me a lot of time because I can do everything inside of Cinema 4D, and even the baking and stuff is absolutely phenomenal. So today we're going to be just sculpting some random brick just to show you the tools and pretty much the basics of sculpting inside Cinema 4D. Now of course this is only a tool and it's only as good as the artist using it. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a cube, and we want to just give this a proportion. It can be any proportion you want. For me, I'm going to have it like this. I'm going to go to display, turn on lines. I'm going to subdivide this a few times just to give me some equal squares. And I think that looks okay. Might bring it in just a tiny bit just to equal out those squares. And that's good. So I'm going to press C to make this editable. And there we go. So first thing you want to do is go up here to the layout and change your layout from the startup or standard to sculpting. And this is going to give us all our sculpting capabilities. So the first thing you want to do is obviously select your object. That's pretty obvious. If you can't select the object that you want, you can always go over here to the menu and select your object and then go back to the sculpting tab. Now everything is grayed out at the minute, and that's because you have to subdivide this. Now before you subdivide anything, you need to kind of evaluate your object. Now this is going to be a brick. Now if I subdivide this, the corners will most likely, when we subdivide, they'll basically collapse on themselves and they will basically smooth itself out, which might be something you want if you're doing maybe a character, but for us we want this to be a brick, so I'm going to do Ctrl Z to undo them. Now you can only edit this at the start, so if you click on the little dialog box at the side of the subdivision, it will bring up the subdivide window. Now you've got smoothness. 100% means it will be smoothed out and it will be rounded. 0% means it will keep its hard edges, and that's what we want because this is going to be a brick. So make sure you set that before you do anything, and then just hit OK, and it will subdivide it once. So if I subdivide now, you'll see the edges actually stay sharp, and that's what we want. So the main tools you'll be using are pretty much these tools here. You won't be using any standard tool, so you won't be using vertices, you won't be using edges, stuff like that. You'll be using these on here. So let's talk about the first button, which we've already done. Now this will subdivide your mesh. It'll take each polygon and split it into 4. That's what subdividing does. That's why it's important to have quads, because if you try subdivide a triangle, it's going to give you some really horrible results because it can't equally subdivide a triangle. There's not enough edges. The next one down is called decrease. Now this will basically decrease your level, and the one below that is increase. So very self-explanatory. Decrease and increase the level you are on. You can also do it here. You can just drag and bring this up to the highest level, to the lowest level. Now you can turn off Thong. If you see in the viewport, we get some of this black shading, and that's because of the Thong level. So if you just turn that off, generally you'll have a nicer result in the viewport. Include top level. This is basically for later on, which we'll talk about. You can lock the layers if you wish. You can create new layers. You can create folders. You can delete layers and obviously clear layers and solo layers, merge them, etc. So this is pretty much like any layering program, Photoshop, Illustrator, etc. If you want just certain details on a specific area, you can add this, and you can also basically reduce the strength, so the opacity of that layer. So do you want it really seen in the viewport, or do you want to bring it back a little bit and just have it as a faint detail? And that's something your artistic side will decide. So that's basically the ones that you want to play around with. Now, if you don't know the concept of sculpting, you basically start off with your base layer, and then you will basically adjust that base layer. So if I'm making a brick, there's nothing I can do here because a brick is square, or majority of bricks are square. So I'm going to increase a level. Now I'm going to adjust some points, maybe add some details, and then I will increase more, add details, adjust the shape, and basically just go through it until I go up to perhaps level 10. Well, that's where I'll be adding the really fine detail. That's really at the end of the modeling stage, where you've added all of the detail, and then you want to add in the cracks, the grit, the little pebbles and stuff like that. That's kind of what you want to do at the end. So up top here, polygon count is really important, so you know how many polygons you're working with, and the memory of how much memory you're using with all them polygons. So the more polygons you have, the higher in level you go up, the more memory you'll be using. So if you're on a machine with like 2 gigabytes, you're not really going to be able to take full advantage of the sculpting. But if you've got something like 8 to 16 to 32, then you're really good to go. You can use as much as you want. Now, of course, it does have limitations, but that's limitations down to your computer. So let's go to the first tool, which is called Pull. Now, what Pull will do is it will basically pull out the edges. Now, to show this in a little, a better detail, I'm going to increase my subdivision up to perhaps 6. Now you can see that the mesh is really dense, so you want to go to display and just go to quick shading. That way your viewport will be really nice and fast. So the pull, this basically pulls polygons out. So if we go across this, you can't see much at the minute. So if we just do Control Z, and we'll just increase the pressure here up to 100%, and I'm sure it's working. Yeah, it's because we've got quick shaded on. So let's go to display and use ground shading. Now you might want to turn the font tag on. There we go. For some reason that might have been a bug with Cinema 4D, where the font tag is actually not. Actually, if you turn the font tag off, you get some horrible results. But if you put it on, it smooths itself out. Not sure why that is actually. But let's do Control Z. So that's one issue we've kind of figured out. So I'm not sure if that's a bug or not. But anyways, onto the pull tool. Now all of these tools generally have the same options. So we'll just look at a few of them, but the other ones are pretty self-explanatory. So the pull one will basically pull the geometry out. So if you're making something like that, then there we go. If you hold Control down, it will basically invert. So instead of pulling, it will push in, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to Control Z that. You've got some options down here. You've got the size, pretty self-explanatory, the size of it. You've got the pressure. Now if you do have the ability to use a Wacom or a tablet of some sort with a pen, I would suggest using that for sculpting. It's so much better than using a mouse, because you would normally just have to keep coming in here and adjusting the pressure. And of course if you want it really pronounced, obviously you'd put it up to almost 100%. With a pen you can kind of decide that on the fly, and this will adjust automatically depending on how hard you press down with your pen. So steady stroke is pretty much used for the mouse, because when you are trying to get precise strokes, it will basically give you precise strokes. So if we're making this kind of spiral shape here, it will give us that. But if we try to do it normally, we as you can see, the mouse is wobbly a little bit, so we've got a little bit of a wobble there and a little bit of wobble there in comparison to this one. So I'll just try to do the same here. So you can see I do get a little bit of a wobble there, but with this on, we can get a really nice result. It makes it really smooth. So if you haven't got a really steady hand, then putting on the the steady stroke is a really good idea. So spacing is pretty self-explanatory as well. This is set to 2, so we're still getting a really nice line. If we set this up to quite high, you can see we actually get dots. So if we put this up really high, maybe we'll see it. As you can see, we're getting some dots there. If you put this up even higher, maybe 100, you can see we do get really a dotted line. So that's what spacing does. Now build up is pretty much what it says, how fast this builds up. So with one click, it's basically on pressure. If I go over it again, we'll get another line and again, and until it goes really, really thick. If we put the build up to 100, when we do a line, it'll go to its max, and then again, and again. If we put it really low, like 2, if we do one line, you can see you can barely see it. So you've got to go over it more and more and more times. So that's what basically build up does. I'm going to be turning the build up to 50 because that seems pretty decent. You can adjust the pressure, which is also pretty good. So that's pretty much the options on the first tab here with the settings. You can link size, which basically is going to link all the sizes to the other brushes. So if this is 22, these will be 22 instead of 20. Again, pretty self-explanatory. Same with link pressure and link symmetry. Just basically link all these together, so you don't have to keep switching them with your brushes. Obviously, link symmetry is going to be one of the ones that you use most, especially if you're working on a symmetrical object. Fall off, of course, the fall off is, if you've used fall offs before, it basically determines what the end and start and perhaps middle would look like. So if we brought this up like this and we put another point in here and did something like this, the brush would look like that. Completely different from what we had before. And again, if we hold control and click, we can just adjust these in really, really strange ways, and then we can just get something completely different like this. And it's really unique. You kind of get a representation in the viewport, which is really, really nice. So let's just adjust a few of these again, and we'll maybe do this, and we'll give it something like a wave. And you can see with holding control down, it insets it, and of course doing it this way, it comes out. So you can get some really interesting results. Again, just basically play with it. It's all down to your artistic side. And the stamp is really important. The stamp is basically going to give you a custom texture. Now, one place you can go to get a few of these is pixelogic.com, which is ZBrush, /ZBrush /download center /alpha, and this will give you all the alphas that most of the ZBrush community have come up with. So you've got industrial, you've got rock, you've got skins, you've got paint, you've got pretty much some generic nature ones here and stuff like that. So if you go into these, you'll get a few here. Obviously there's not going to be a lot, but these are just kind of the free ones, which are still quite nice to download. As you can see here, we've got quite a lot. And with the scale texture here, and all you do is you will basically grab one you like. Let's just give you a demonstration. We'll take this one here, and I'm going to click it. It's going to bring me to the top of the page here. Click download, and it'll download. So once it's downloaded, you basically open it, and you extract it to wherever you want. I'm going to extract it to my desktop, and there we go. So once you've done that, all is well. You can go back into Cinema, and you can basically use stamp, make sure that's ticked on, find your file. We used Alien Skin here. This is one we downloaded just now, and then you've got some options here. We're just going to use this, and as you can see, we get this texture. Now sometimes this isn't really what you want. Now it's really blurry in the viewport because we don't have enough subdivisions, because this is the stage at the end, like we talked about at the beginning, where you have fine detail. Now of course, if we go up in subdivision, this might get a little bit better, but when we add more details, it'll stand out a lot more. So as you can see in the bottom corner here, it's just caching all of the polygons and points and stuff, so we can draw on it. Now if you look, you can see how finer that detail is in comparison to this one. It might get a little bit sharper, but it's not going to be as fine as this one. So what you want to do with something like this, if you're going to basically detail this object, you would want to go to the settings, you would want to go to spacing, and you want to crank this spacing up. Now, as you can see here with the spacing, we can get some really nice results. And this is pretty much how you would texture by adding fine detail. Now, you can also go here to the draw mode and change the draw mode to drag rec, which means drag rectangle, and we can just drag a rectangle out and we can get some really nice results. Now, you will notice in the viewport it does get a little bit laggy. That's just the way it is with this many polygons and this much memory being used. You have to kind of have a happy medium, but you have to be at the top level in order to add this in. So as you can see, we're getting some really nice fine detail here, and it looks really cool. Now, if you wanted to do freehand, you would have to increase your texture size if you wanted something like this. So you can get something quite like that, which is pretty damn cool in my opinion. That is really cool. And that's pretty much what you would do to texture this. Now, of course, we said we were going to go through a lot of these brushes, but I'm only going to go through a few because I think you're pretty smart enough to understand what these do. So I'll quickly go through them. So the wax brush, this will basically add or subtract parts of your object. Now, if you want to fill in stuff, like you want to make eye sockets, hold control down and just keep clicking, and this will go deeper and deeper into the mesh. And that's basically how you subtract and add. So if we want to give him some eyebrows, we just keep clicking and we give him some eyebrows. If you hold shift, you can smooth out the edges, which is really cool. So I'm going to undo that with Control Z. And that's pretty much what wax does. So if you need to add volume and like areas, eyebrows, indents, stuff like that, wax is a good option. You can also add a stamp to the wax to give it a bit of different texture, which is cool. So you got smooth. This basically does what shift does. So hold down shift and you can smooth it out. Repeat will basically repeat something. Now, this only really works well with a stamp. So if you've got a stamp on, it will repeat the stamp over and over, which is really cool. We've got erase, which will just erase, like if let's say we do a wax, so we've done an intent. If you use erase, it'll just get rid of that and bring it back to the original, which is really handy. So fill will basically fill in areas. So again, if we do the wax here, just get rid of this, use the fill, and it's going to fill in them objects for you, which is really nice, especially if you don't want to get rid of detail around this instead of using the erase. So that's pretty cool. So I'm just going to get rid of that. The flatten, of course, will flatten edges. Grab will actually allow you to grab parts and actually drag it out, which is pretty cool for horns and stuff like that. Inflate will actually inflate. So if you've got muscles, stuff like that, inflate will actually inflate them areas and make them bigger. The knife tool will actually cut into your mesh. This is pretty good for making wrinkles, scars, stuff like that, cracks. Now, pinch works really well with the knife tool because it actually brings them in closer. As you can see, if we keep doing it, it'll bring it in closer and closer, and it'll just pinch the edges together, which is pretty cool. And then we've got scrape, which will basically scrape away at your surface. And that's pretty much it. Then you've got mask, which of course you can grab a mask, draw your mask, and then you can invert the mask or clear it. So if you grab something like the wax tool, you can see that it's only going to put this wax around this area, and of course you can feather the mask and stuff out if you so wish, and then just clear mask, and you see you get a really nice area here, and then you can just smooth it out, and that's pretty much what you've got. So that's pretty much how you use the tools. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through a process of creating this brick. And I'm not going to explain what I'm doing. I just want you guys to watch and kind of understand the tools and stuff that I'm using. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab, let's see, I'll grab the flatten. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around here, and I'm going to basically get rid of all these harsh edges. Now because this is a brick, we want it to be random, and this is exactly what we're doing, just being random. I'm going to rotate and get rid of these edges. I'm going for a kind of an old brick style instead of a new type of brick. So I'm not being anything specific, I'm just getting rid of these sharp edges. Now one thing to note is that UVing your object before you start is also a very good idea, especially if you've got a really complex object. Although this is just a very simple brick, so we're going to leave the big sculpture object to its own devices, because it does have a built-in UVing. It's not particularly fantastic, but it does its job on these simple objects. So that's something to keep in mind. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'm just going to roughly go through it, just so you guys can understand kind of the process you would go through in order to create something like this, or any object really. It really doesn't matter what you do. And so there we go. So we've got all the edges smashed up. They look pretty good to me. And then we can just maybe grab the wax tool, increase the brush size, increase the pressure, and I'm going to just take out some area here. And I'm also going to go to perhaps this area here and just take out some of this here, because I want this kind of to be broken. I'm going to bring my brush size down and just get rid of some more here. I'm going to go back to the flatten, and I'm going to flatten out some of these edges because they look a little bit worse for wear. I'm holding shift just to smooth some of these areas, and I'm going to do the same here and just shift and just maybe flatten some of these out. I'm going to grab the scrape tool and just scrape a few of these areas, and we don't want too harsh of an edge on most of these. So just nice and dirty all over, just sorting some of these edges out, and that looks pretty good to me. So what I'm going to do now, we've got our block. Now we need some details in here, so I'm going to subdivide it. We're going to go up to level 7. Pretty cool. It's going to cache it and all that jazz for us, which is perfect. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add, let's see, we're probably going to subdivide it one more time. I'm going to go up to the, level 8, which is pretty high. So we're going to leave it to do its stuff. It's going to bake, it's going to calculate all that stuff for us. You can see it's still not done yet, so we just need to wait for that. In Windows, try not to click once it's calculating because you might crash the program. So there we go, we've got a lot of polygons. It's using quite a lot of memory, so we need to be careful. I'm going to go to the pull, and I'm going to reset all my values. I'm going to go to the stamp, I'm going to go to use stamp, I'm going to navigate to my desktop, and I'm going to use the VM crumple. I got this from the same place, the ZBrush alpha site. And here we go. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to settings. I'm going to turn on spacing. I'm going to crank that baby up to about 21, and I'm going to just do a test. So from that test, it's not looking particularly great, so I'm going to do Control Z, undo that. I'm going to bring the size up a little bit. That's looking a little bit better. I'm going to increase the size a little bit more. Do a test. Looks pretty good there. I'm going to bring the pressure up to maybe 34, 35. There we go. Control Z. Try not to do Control Z because you'll basically go back to level 7, which will waste time. So be careful when you do Control Z in. I'm using the pull here. So this looks fine. The build up is fine. And we're using freehand, which is absolutely fine. The size is okay. We've got the stamp here, which is absolutely fine. And then I'm going to basically just start detailing this now. So I'm going to go into these edges, and just if you're lagging a little bit, just try and bear with it. If it's really too bad, you can just reduce the size of your brush. I'm kind of just clicking once and dragging a little bit just to add this detailing. I don't want to go too crazy. I'm going to go a bit crazy down here, and we're just adding detail, and this is the detail that I'm talking about. So once you're happy with that detail, make sure you spin your camera around and make sure you're facing the detail that you want to add in. If you start adding detail over here, it'll actually start bleeding off, which means it's going to be very blurry on the edges. So make sure, for here, this is a good example actually. You can see up here, it's actually stretched and a little bit blurry, so you need to position your camera. I'm going to reduce the size of this just a little bit. There we go. So I'm going to just add my detail in here, which is pretty cool. Add a little bit to the sides, a little bit to the top here. And this is basically what you would do to detail it. And this is a really nice way of doing it. Now you don't have to be fantastic. Obviously, this is a tutorial for you guys. But when you come to this, you want to put a lot more effort into it. You want to think about where you want to put the detail. And you know, if you're viewing this just from one area, like let's pretend it's for a poster, and you've got bricks. No one's going to see the backside, so we're not even going to texture the backside here, because we're only going to see this front part here. So just add the detail where you need it. It'll save time, and it'll save like lots of resources. And of course, time is the most important, because you don't want to spend forever on it. So let's just add in our details here, and to me that looks okay. If you want to add some cracks in, be my guest. I'll just try and do one here. So I want to bring the pressure down, because this is generally quite big. As you can see, it's very, very pronounced. So maybe reduce this quite low. And there we go, we get some cracks in here. Now you can see it's actually pinching. Now you might want to turn the pinch down, just so you can add this in. Now we might want a little bit of pinch actually, come to think of it. Yeah, something like that. And you can add your cracks in. And you can also pinch this yourself when you wish. You don't want to pinch it too much, because it starts to bleed the textures in. You can go over these. Now I do suggest you turn on the steady stroke for this, because it really does help out, especially when you try and go over it again. It really does help you out. And that's pretty much what we can get here. So we've got some cracks and stuff, and all is well. So let's say this is finished. What do we do now? Well, you go down here to Bake, Sculpt, Objects. Click on that, it'll bring up this window. The window is actually very simple to navigate. What's the file name you want to save it as? I'm going to save it as tutorial. Okay, what format do you want to save this as? A PSD. What color depth? 32 bits per channel is fine. Preset, basically size. What size do you want? A custom, 256. I'm going to go for a 1K map. Lock ratio, just in case we actually accidentally adjust these. Super sampling, you can leave that as 0. Pixel border, which is the width between the actual object and the border, 5 is fine. Single file, so we can have all of these objects in one file. And being a Photoshop file, we can actually open this in Photoshop and have all the different layers, so they're all together, which is really, really cool. Create result copy, so we can actually make another copy and we can delete this when we're done, which is pretty cool. So go to the options. Now this is basically what do you want? Displacement, yes please. Normal map, yes please, especially for all this detail. We want to capture that. Ambient occlusion, we don't really need that, so I'll leave that off. Optimal mapping, now this is where it kind of UVs for you. I'm going to put it to cubic. Include top levels, you don't want to use that. So this is the most important part here. Source object high res mesh. So we want this to be the highest mesh, and our highest level is 8. So make sure 8 is checked. And what is our lowest mesh? Well, depending on your model, you may want to use 2, 1, or 0. Sometimes using 0 isn't good enough, simply because it doesn't have enough polygons and it'll take a lot longer. So generally you want to use between 0 and 2. I'm going to use 2 as my low mesh, which means once it calculates through, this will be my base mesh, which is a pretty good starting point in comparison to that. So I think that's good enough. So I'm going to use number 2. And it's just calculating all this geometry again, that's fine. And then that's pretty much what you want to use. So once this is calculated out here, we will just bake this. And the bake is actually pretty damn fast. So I'm going to hit bake. You can preview it if you want, just to make sure it looks okay. But it is very pixelated, so you won't get the full grasp of it. So you've just baked it out. You can look down here, it's just going to bake everything out for you. And I'm not going to pause the video because it is really fast. So you can see, because I'm recording my desktop, it's kind of bugged out here. My computer's having a hard time calculating all of the detail and stuff, so we're just going to let it run, and hopefully it's still recording, because it'd be a shame if it wasn't. But like I said, doing this in Cinema 4D, it's just a lifesaver. It really is, and it's so fast and it's so simple, and it feels natural. I don't know why, it just feels really natural to do it inside of Cinema 4D and have that already done, because if you've got body paint as well, you can actually texture this inside of Cinema 4D, which is also another great feature. Love it. So it's rendering the texture. It's going for 54 seconds. As you can see, it's starting to render now. So I think in a few minutes it will be done. There we go. So it's rendering texture. One minute so far, which is pretty good for a 1K map. You can see here it's giving us the preview. It's rendering out. Pretty cool. And yes, so the tools are pretty simple to use. I mean, if we just move this to the side, and the tools that you'll be using the most is probably wax, pull, smooth. You'll always be using smooth, but use that with shift. I mean, they all have their uses. They really do. I mean, they give you the best tools and pretty much all the tools you need in order to create sculptures. They've given you a very easy masking solution. They've given you inflate for characters' muscles, knives for cracks, scars, anything that's really fine detail. Grab, which we didn't actually talk about grab. Grab will allow you to move around your base object, which is very important. I forgot about grab. But yeah, you basically grab polygons and you can move it around. That's why there's no need to use the vertices, edges and polygons, because grab does it for you, which is really cool. Fill, you know, it's got its uses. Erase, of course, pretty decent. Smooth, again. Wax is really good. I think just overall it's a really nice solution. So I'm gonna stop talking about it now because I'm giving it too much praise. Although you can really never give it too much praise because it is fantastic. So if there's any tutorials, any specific tutorials that you guys want to see, you know, please leave a comment about it. It doesn't matter who you are or what you want to see. If I've got the ability to do a tutorial on it, I will do it. I've been thinking of doing some modeling tutorials for you guys, but they tend to run into like an hour long, so I might have to record it fully and then cut it up into maybe 3 or 4 episodes, because I don't think anyone wants to sit there and watch something for about an hour, because people lose interest. I mean, this episode here, this is going to be quite long as well. I think it may be 40 minutes. We can actually just take a quick peek, and 33 minutes. So not too bad, but I think 33, 35, 40 minutes is probably the max I would want to go up to. So it looks like we're completed. Oh no, we're not. It's actually still going. But you see here where it says not responding. That's because my computer's working really hard to support Cinema 4D while I'm recording. So hopefully it'll sort itself out and it'll finish up, which is pretty cool. I shouldn't have really checked the time because I knew it would have messed it up. But hopefully the recording is still going, and we can go from there. I'm not sure how much longer it would take. Although this is a pretty dense model. We've got 8 levels. We've got tons of polygons, over 3 mil I think, and we're using 1.2 gigabytes of memory, which isn't too bad. I think I've got 6 gigs, so it's okay. I do need to upgrade my computer because it is very old now actually. So there we go. So it's all done. We're gonna close that. I'm going to go to layout. I'm going to go to startup. You can see we've got a white mesh, and that is basically the object that we want. So I'm going to turn off the original cube, which has got this S here. This is the sculpting tag, and it's given us this object here. Now in the viewport it doesn't look fantastic, but let's give it a render and we can see that we get a lot of good detail. Now if we zoom in, we're going to get some more detail, which is pretty damn cool. and it looks really good. If we turn this one on, and perhaps if we just move this over and do maybe a side-by-side comparison, let's do something like that and just render this out. I'm not sure how long this will take because I've never rendered out the sculpted version before, but as you can see, it might be a good idea to give them both the same material. So let's just duplicate this, we can delete that one, and we can just disable the normal and displacement, and then we can just give this the same color, and I believe it will give itself the same color. There we go. So if we render this out, we can see the differences between these two, and you know, overall it looks pretty good. We do lose a small bit of detail, but to be honest, I don't think it's that noticeable. You see there's a little bit of detail down here that we lose down here, but honestly, if we add texture color to this, and lights, for instance, if we just put in some lights and put this in a radial array and just increase the distance and bring this up slightly, maybe just give that a quick render again. Might be a bit too bright actually. Yeah, it's way too bright. So let me just adjust the light here. Something like 55. And the light will basically enhance the shadows and whatnot. If we actually turn the shadows on, there we go. And this will give us basically a better look at the details because we'll have shadows. Now of course, because we've got so many area lights, it's going to take a little bit longer to render out, which is absolutely fine. In fact, let's just put them onto soft shadow map. This will render out a lot faster. I don't want to keep you guys longer than I have to. But if we render this out, we should see some pretty decent shadows. So it's just rendering out the shadow maps now. And it'll render this out. There we go. So overall, I think the details are pretty close. I mean, it's not bad at all. You can see we lose a little bit of detail in here, like this area here. We don't actually get a lot of that here. But to be honest, I don't think it's that noticeable, and it might be because of the camera angle. But I think overall it is really nice, and I mean, you can't fault it. It's better than having ZBrush and going from ZBrush to Cinema 4D, especially when setting up textures is a real pain. Of course, you're never going to get that close to the original, but for a fake displacement and normal map, this is pretty good. Now of course, you can go into the actual normal map here, and you can actually increase the strength and stuff. So maybe we want to up this to maybe 125%, and maybe that will give us that detail that we're actually missing. I could be wrong, could be right. Maybe it might just need a little bit of playing around with, but I think overall we have done really well. We can increase this maybe a few, and maybe that will give us the detail that we're missing. But to be honest, I don't even know why I'm nitpicking at this, because from what we got with the displacement and stuff from our original, it looks really good. And if you never saw this tutorial, you never saw the process of this, then you would never know that this was like missing a few details from here or a few details from here. You just wouldn't know. So I think overall it is a really good step in, you know, with Cinema 4D. And I was actually debating whether to still continue to use Cinema 4D. And since R14 has come out and I've got my hands on it, and I'm really loving it. They've gone, you know, beyond with the sculpting, and that's really like one of the best features that I can say that Cinema 4D R14 has is the sculpting features. They are phenomenal. So guys, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.